Morning, folks. Welcome to the Joey Show. I'm Joey Avery. We have a very special and important program for you today. I don't know if you have noticed a disturbance in the force. The force, of course, of the comedy community, a tight-knit community of like-minded individuals who has always been, until recently, founded on love, community, connection, and the idea of potentially getting rich and famous for barely speaking into a microphone. Folks, what has happened to the comedy community is sad, it is dire, it is a disgrace. Now, some of this episode may seem a little inside baseball to some of you, but guess what? If you listen to this show, if you're a true member of the 12, I think you'll understand. I think you'll know. And we're going to tell you why this has bubbled up recently, why you're seeing it, if you are, and if not, why you will soon. But we're going to take you through a little trip down memory lane of what the comedy community actually is, aside from a pile of pudding pops. Folks, we're kidding. Now, a lot of clips have been making the rounds this week as Marc Maron has been doing his special promo. It is a great special. Give it a watch. But he's had choice words for a lot of aspects of comedy that he finds to be really shitty and bad. Those are his beliefs. A lot of that is targeted at what people call the Rogan sphere. A lot of that is targeted at a city people call Austin, Texas. I'm going to play a clip for you now, but then I'm going to take you through a little walk down memory lane, and we're going to understand why exactly this is happening, because, folks, it's not just Marc Maron. It's not just happening in a vacuum. There are incentives. There are market forces that have changed the comedy community potentially forever. Now, let's start with this clip, because this got a lot of people going.
What do you think the Austin shelf life is going to be?
I think that it's so effectively tribalized at this point. It really comes down to material. I mean, at what point, it's like whatever they represented in terms of policy. And
Sure.
It's not a stretch. It's like they won. Trans people are frightened. They have no ability to get health care anymore. And they're afraid of being alive and have no freedom left. So that's done. When do you stop with the jokes? When do you stop with the jokes? And like immigrants, okay, well, they're being ripped away from their homes, and they're all terrified, and okay, so that's done. When do you stop with the jokes?
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to pick on the vulnerable and the marginalized, but I mean, they're down.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
they're down.
Why do you got to keep hitting them unless you're a hack? Now, there's a question.
Wow, Mark.
He
Wow.
comes in swinging.
Yeah.
Okay, hot and spicy clip right there for you, courtesy of Marc Maron on the Bad Friends podcast with Andrew Santino and Bobby Lee. Love both of them. Great people. Haven't met Mark. I'm sure he'd hate me. I'm sure he would. That's okay. I still loved his special, and I respect his work. That's fine. He's come out swinging at people, and it's been kind of fun. I think a lot of people have found it cathartic. I think there's a large amount of people in our society right now who look at the dominant political forces, comedic forces that have wedged themselves in with politics, and they don't feel represented. And so to watch someone shit on all that is exciting. But is it because we're entering a new era? Okay, I want to take you a little walk down memory lane here. Do you remember what podcasts used to be? Okay, do you remember what they used to be? They were literally the opposite of a silent film. It was, instead of watching three people run around and hit each other in the face with frying pans to no words except for no, it was the opposite of that. It was to watch four people, usually Jewish people, having an allergic reaction to something, going, well, actually, this is how. And that was a beautiful time. It was an audio era. Audio was king there for a short time. And the only way that you could grow a podcast was by having friends on. And if you could get on someone's podcast, then people would go, oh, wow. Does this person have a podcast? How could I get on their pod? This was a real way that people found people. If you could get on, to use the popular example, Joe Rogan, people will be like, wait, this person's interesting. Where do I find them? Where do I hear more about them? Now there's so much content out there. You go on a podcast, people go, okay, that was cool. Maybe I'll see him one other place. No one fucking cares, and they shouldn't. There's too much stuff. But back in the day when Maron came about and audio was king, you had to be friends with the people who had the big podcasts. There was an entire world, an entire thought process, an entire ethos that went into what people now call the Rogan sphere, that was about just having your friends on and lifting each other up, because that was the industry incentive and what you were supposed to do. Now things have changed. Podcasts are still relatively popular, but now it's much more of a video podcast platform. The number one place people consume podcasts is YouTube. Now, just to be clear here statistically, YouTube is now the number one service used most often by weekly podcast listeners. Nearly half of Americans have both listened to and watched a podcast. That visual layer supercharges clips, beefs, parasocial drama. All right, this is something that we're all familiar with. When you're trying to cut through, when you open your YouTube, okay, millions of people have posted something that day. To get a piece of real estate in the little 3 video fold that most people see, you got to be hooking. You got to be hooking. I mean, and that's probably the problem with this show. Why am I, instead of sitting in a multi-million-dollar studio, why am I sitting in a forest? Literally, I'm in the Amazon. I'm sitting in the Amazon rainforest. Why am I out in the middle of nowhere? Maybe it's because I haven't been getting into that podcast beef. So, folks, what does YouTube do? Okay, now, I'm not an anti-YouTube person. I want to make that stance very clear right now. PSA. This is a PSA for The Joey Show. We support all things YouTube and Google, and also Spotify, and also Apple, although there's really no podcast algorithm. So let's just stick to YouTube. I support everything YouTube has ever done, and I'm a pro YouTube guy. Just want to say that right now. Please boost the pod. But I don't know if we're going to get a boost unless we actually start. You know, it's actually, there's a real meta aspect to choosing this as a topic, because there are so many things in the algorithm right now that are like, Marc Maron takes down the entire Austin scene. And that's the reason that I wanted to make this video, is not to make the same video that everyone else is making, but to study where we are in this entire life cycle of the industry that I am part of. Because I could do Marc Maron takes on all of the Austin scene, but a lot of people have done it. I was doing research for this, and I was looking at videos on YouTube, and there were a ton of them that I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is AI. And some of them I was like, I'm pretty sure this is just an Indian guy. And there is nothing wrong with being an Indian guy making videos on YouTube, but why am I learning about the industry that I'm in from Arjun in Prabhatabad? With all due respect to everyone named Arjun and Prabhatabad, which is a lovely place, which I would love to visit. I went to India one time. Did I? Real fans know what I'm talking about. I was supposed to. I didn't have a visa. If you're going to go to India, have a visa. Okay? That's one. And I'm not talking about the credit card. So we've entered this space. Now, I don't think Marc Maron is playing into this. I think he is someone who has famously always had grudges with every other comedian on the planet and freely speaks his mind. A lot of people are using clips like the one I just showed you from the Bad Friends podcast to be like, oh, yes, Maron's finally going after Rogan. He's gone after Rogan before. In that podcast, he also called Eric Clapton a hack. He's really not that reserved in his criticism. But what's interesting to me is that there is a new incentive structure, because I also went and I watched podcasts that were comedians who, yes, are even less established than me, going and trying to shit on bigger comedians, because what they have realized is the chance that I get a guest on my podcast, slim. The chance that I get to use someone's name who's already popular and shit on them, big. Now, that doesn't erase the criticism. I think a lot of very famous comedians have opened themselves up to criticism, especially as they wade into the political realm, a lot of times without any even inkling of background knowledge or a chance of reasonable pushback. That has happened. That is true. It deserves and welcomes criticism. The reason I bring all this up is I think it's interesting because I'm curious to see where the actual community goes. Because this is no longer the audio-only podcast era of, oh my God, I hope I can just get my friends on. This is a, oh, if your name has heat on it, I'm going to use it to try and fuck you in the ass era of comedy, which is going to be interesting. Now, I think there are some good aspects to that. I think a lot of comics who have shit going on don't want to talk about it. I understand why, because as someone who has some shit going on, I think people could take a clip of this, or they could take a piece of this, or they could take it out of context, or think it's about them. I'm really just trying to talk about a larger trend in the waters in which I swim. Is that okay? I am wearing a Sharks shirt, vintage. It's a beauty. Slow fashion, all right? Not fast. This is old. The person who used to wear this might have got hit by a truck. I don't know what happened, but that's not the point. The point is that I do think, as a comedian, I think that the world in which the mask is off and you don't just have to kiss the ring is probably beneficial long-term for the concept of actually getting the best comedy, of actually being held to account for speech, of many things. But I do think it's going to be a really weird time, because anytime you get famous, I think people are going to come for that ass. Now, there is a pioneer in this realm that I think is important to say as we're going through the history of how and when all this changed. And it is a retired comedian, a man who exists explicitly in the podcast space, a gentleman named Brendan Schaub. Now, Brendan Schaub, as a character in the comedy world, has been pretty well covered, and a lot of people have actually made an entire living just ridiculing the man. If you don't know what I'm talking about, he was a UFC fighter who became a comedian and podcaster. He fell into Rogan's orbit. He was convinced to become a comedian instead of continuing to fight. And what ended up happening was he immediately got fast-tracked because of the eyeballs on him. He produced a Showtime special, which was too early in his career. And basically the general comedy fan world, especially those on Reddit, of a community of which I have several fans, shout out to the Reddit crew, revolted. And a subreddit for his podcast, The Fighter and the Kid, became one of the most popular subreddits on the entire platform. Over 100,000 people. It was a place that was so rich that it developed its own slang. It was like a Clockwork Orange. They called it Shabanese. They would use his kind of verbal tics, some missteps in his career. For example, one time he, in his Showtime special, did an Asian voice to convey the story of the UFC's Asian doctor who people compared against the actual Asian doctor, and it didn't sound good. It sounded like this.
This giant Asian doctor walks up to him and goes, "Mr. Schaub, sorry for your loss." "Thank you, that makes me feel better. Thank you for that." He goes, "But your lip."
My name is Dr. Greg Shue. I'm a board-certified ophthalmologist. I'm the UFC consultant physician. I take care of all the fighters as well as employees within the UFC family.
And he takes out the biggest syringe you've ever seen in your life, like he's out of a goddamn comic book. Goes, "Mr. Schaub, after you numb your lip, you need many, many stitches. This be worst pain in your life, guaranteed. Worst pain in your life.
What I enjoy the most is really seeing the rapport that I have with the fighters. I've got to know them so well that they just know me now, and they just know me as the Doc.
So there were a lot of missteps, and a lot of them were Brendan's own, okay? But what happened was, because he was the perfect lightning rod, an example of what to ridicule, an example of the excesses of the podcast era in which you could get famous only by having friends and, I would say, being nice to them. But frankly, as you move up the ladder, at some point you are sucking someone's dick because there is a power imbalance. He became an example of the excesses of this entire part of the comedy world. And there was backlash. Because comedy fans, even though a lot of people know that it's not a strict meritocracy, I think people want to think, those who are truly invested, want to think that the comedy that they're consuming is of a higher caliber, that they're supporting the right people. It's easy when they're an underdog, but when they're famous, do they really deserve all that? Because it's hard to say anyone does compared to other people. But Brendan stuck out. He was an obvious example. I've heard he's a nice fellow. I don't know him. He became a lightning rod so big that, yes, an entire language was formed around him. An entire Reddit community was set up just to ridicule him. And eventually, entire YouTube channels, okay, commentary channels, people that talk about comedy all the time, get tons of views, way more views than comedians doing podcasts. Because people don't have time to watch all the podcasts, so sometimes we just want to watch the worst moments, the moments that are cringe. Enter channels like one called Podcast Cringe, in which a man who doesn't show his face, but I think he's an Australian lawyer or something, just pulls the moments from the popular podcasts that he finds cringeworthy. And a lot of times, he's right. Not all the time, but a lot of times he is. And so there became a world where people could, instead of just listening to podcasts, I mean, like, I wonder what it'd be like to be in that world, they could just go, well, I could just make fun of these podcasts and people will watch that because they know that podcast. But sometimes they say, well, I don't know if I like that. And then you can fall into this whole new sphere of people where you fall down this different algorithmic rabbit hole. And that's where we are now. Now we know what it takes to cut through on YouTube now. We understand what it takes to cut through in a crowded internet. It is being negative. It is being inflammatory. Okay, there's plenty of I was doing research on this. There's plenty of studies at universities that prove that negative language is what cuts through in an algorithm. It's what people click. It's a fact of life. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's cringe, it wins. Now, I'm not pretending I'm above all this, okay? Dirty little secret. I'm a comedian. I am friends with some comedians who come up on these channels that are filled with hate and just ridicule them. And do I watch? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because I don't have time to watch everyone's pod. Sometimes I just want to check in and see what's going on, and then I can go, oh, that's not fair. That wasn't very nice. And other times you can. But as an entire new generation of comedian comes online, pun intended, what people are starting to realize is that the critique community, the criticism community, the I want to work off this algorithm community is the way to go. So you have an incentive structure set up where now comedians, it behooves them to shit on other comedians instead of to be nice to them. Now, is that good for the community? That's an open question. I would argue that the community has always been based on some people who make beautiful, lifelong friendships doing a thing that they love, and also a lot of people who are very insecure, very catty, very bitter, and very shitty, and we're just looking at whatever would work for them. And if you could get in, great, that works for me, and if you didn't, then fuck them anyway. And this is just a new incentive structure for people to basically capitalize off their own, base instincts and insecurities and desire to be famous and find whatever way will work for them. And again, A lot of the criticism is fair, so I'm not even necessarily against it. I just think it's interesting. It brings up another point. And believe it or not, it was actually another topic that Mr. Maron himself was talking about, which is what happens to comedy when it's algorithmically based.
There are comics doing, a minute of crowd work specifically to get 1 million hits. To do what?
Matt Rife, who I don't know his act per se.
Doesn't have one.
I don't know that. I've heard you say that.
Crowd work guy.
But it was really, really compelling.
I get what you're saying.
Okay.
I expect more out of stand-up. So, you can lower your bar and live in that and accept all that. And that's fine with me. I don't care. But to tell me that, who am I to judge? I'm me to judge. Now, if you want to, exist and watch stand-up be watered down to any moron that can talk to a room full of morons, that's fine. I mean, I think everybody should be able to. I mean, I think crowd work's an important tool, usually for crowd management. You should know how to do it in case shit goes down in the room. But, a fairly clever teenager can do crowd work. I did it in high school. Fine. But for me, that's, and I'm not even judging Matt. I understand what you're saying.
Because Matt is here, and I think he's your brother. Come on in.
People want me to talk to him. The people feel like that I'm being hard on him. I'm not really. I understand what crowd work is. And I've seen it a long time. There were guys when we were coming up that only did crowd work.
My first HBO special, I did crowd work, and I did my act, and I did crowd work.
It's fun. Jimmy Brogan, remember? All crowd work. It's been around. Okay, there's all kinds of comedy. Like you said, Carrot Top, Dennis Miller. I got no problem. Professionals are professionals. Matt's a professional. But you asked me why I got into it, is that I felt when I was younger, and I'd done a lot of different stuff. I'd written stuff. I'd acted in plays. I did photography. I was always looking for a way to express myself. But because I was such a fan of comedy when I was growing up, for a very specific reason. When I watched comics when I was a kid, whether it was Don Rickles or Buddy Hackett, Jay Leno when he was younger, listening to Richard Pryor records, I found that the miracle of comedy was they made the world manageable.
So, as usual, there's a lot to unpack there. Now, I think it's funny because I both agree and disagree with Marc in this exact moment. He starts off the clip by saying something very interesting. He's like, oh, they go do crowd work to get 1 million hits to do what? Make a fucking living, bud. Huh? I think there's an important piece of it there. Now, it's funny. I'm coming at someone who I think it was one of the better specials I've seen in years. I loved his last special. I think it's great. I love what he does. I think even Matt Rife responded to that by saying it's unfortunate to hear that, from someone who I'm a fan of, that is mad just because I'm living his dream, which I think that's what he said. If it's true, hell of a clap back, solid. But what Marc is saying is also fair. He just doesn't quite fully have, like Matt Rife does have an act. It's not just crowd work. That's what he got famous off of. But I'm pretty sure he actually has a special where he pours his grandpa's ashes out of a fleshlight, which prop comedy might be an entirely new thing to bring up, an entirely different topic. I think what Marc fundamentally misunderstands there is how difficult it is to punch through in the modern environment when you couldn't just be the first guy who had a show with a microphone who talked to people. Not to disrespect his show was amazing. It was easy. It was a different time. He was an early adopter. It's easier to cut through. You could do it on artistic merit, and I think you still can, but it's hard. The demands that it takes to try to burst onto the scene right now is creating an insanely high volume of stuff, which I think he would understand. Jokes don't come at that level. Now, I'm not even bitter because I obviously I post mostly crowd work stuff, but I don't consider myself a crowd work guy. You come see the show, it's mostly the show, and then there's crowd work, and I film those and put them out, and a lot of times that's what you see until the special coming out. Please subscribe to the other YouTube. But what he touches on that is important and is completely fair, and he's right to say, A, it's his opinion on how he wants to discuss it, but B, it's like, yeah, we do need to protect the concept of what actually works in our world. Because if it ends up being a race to the bottom because that's what the algorithm wants, then comedy is going to get to a dark place that it has edged closer to. And the reason that I bring this up, and I've been doing this entire thing about the industry that I'm in, is because, yeah, I assume some of you are comedy fans, which is why you listen to this, but also because I think it's emblematic of everything that's going on right now. I realized this. I remember realizing it early on. I would post a clip and it would go viral, and I'd be like, okay, great. Everyone loved what I did. Well, some people did, but sometimes clips would just go viral because I started posting a lot of stuff during COVID. I would just post something mildly inflammatory. People would fight. I would get my visibility. I'd gain fans. Does that sound like any other industry? Politics. Does it sound like any other industry? Every industry is based on eyeballs. We're all going through this. I realize usually it's funny because I thought, I'll do an entire episode based on comedy, and that'll probably be a fun and funny episode, and I don't think I've said anything funny. I wore these glasses with the strict intent to be funny. I thought I'd be hilarious. Didn't happen. Hasn't happened at all. Apparently, I think global geopolitics are funnier than comedy, which I apparently speak about in very somber and serious tones. But this is what happens when you do research for an episode. Now, the entire concept of the algorithm and the delivery mechanism and the changing landscape of podcasts is leaving out a key portion of the entire critique here, which has been the decidedly political lean of comedy podcasts of late. Now, for the longest time, especially during the early podcast era and the early Hollywood eras, it was a decidedly and consistently left-wing art form, especially during the early days of the Nerd Melt and Comedy Bang Bang and the early podcasts. The comedy world had to lean left. In the last election cycle, as many people know, and as Marc Maron notes frequently, that leaned right. You had Rogan publicly endorsing Trump. You had my friends over at Flagrant having Trump on. They did invite Kamala. That's important to note. Am I more fair to them because I love them? Yes, and I always will. But it was interesting because the right wing was the only group that decided it was important. Now left wing people have decided it is. You had Pete Buttigieg going on Flagrant. You had Fareed Zakaria. You've had a lot of people coming on Ezra Klein to actually realize that there's an entire world of people that do want to listen to perspectives through comedians. And so all of this is to say the concept that critique is just algorithm-based is not necessarily fair, because some of the critique is just fully based off of what Marc Maron believes Austin comedy stands for, and a lot of times it does, and knowing some of the people, it genuinely does. And there is fair political disagreement and fair political critique, and if those clips catch fire, they should. It's interesting. We're talking about it right now. And that's where I think this concept of the community becoming a takedown-based culture is scary and dangerous, but also healthy. Because the concept that comedy ever was a place where power was so centralized that you could not critique the people at the top of the mountaintop because you wanted to get on their podcast. Whether or not that fostered a nice community of people lifting each other up for the few people that got in is still unhealthy to what comedy has always been supposed to be, which is telling it like it is, baby. You know, the idea that comedians are like truth tellers or modern day philosophers gets very cringe very quickly, but the concept that what makes comedy good is someone saying, it's basically the guy at the party pounding his fist on the table and being like, yeah, I'll fucking say it. Yeah, I'll fucking say it. No one else was going to say it, so I'll say it because we've all been thinking it. That is what good comedy is, and that will never be universal, and it will always speak to different people, which is why it may be good that we've entered an era where people can just fucking take the gloves off and let it rip, And if that is incentivized, it might not be fun for everybody, but I am optimistic about that because it's good. There are some times where you watch what's going on in society. It could be the comedy community. It could be different podcasts, whatever. But you, at some point, are going, am I losing my fucking mind? And when someone comes along and says, are these people crazy? You finally go, oh, shit, I feel like I'm fucking back. So, cautious optimism for it. We'll see. I mean, look, I really want to get this pod to the point where there is a cottage industry dedicated to taking me down. Will it be hard? No. Probably not. I mean, I don't know. I like to get after it. I'm a fun guy. Dude. I let it fly. I went to Creed this weekend. Fuck. I'm not going to lie, dude. That Creed concert was one of the best times of my life. I'll put up a photo of the Creed fit right here. I did a Get Ready With Me for Creed, which I would love to plug in, but I'm pretty sure that Higher, the song that I put in the background, will get restricted, so I don't think I can. But I had a fucking great time. I had a phenomenal time. That's why I'm wearing these fast glasses right now. It was awesome. Now, the reason that I bring that up is not just to note the beautiful outfit that I put together and what a majestic, wonderful night it was. It's because, like I said, I do like to get after it. All right? Did I have a zillion beers and some cigs that night? Yeah, I did. Was I eating some fungal-based herbage that enhances your evening? Yeah, I did. Was to the point where I was texting my friend and he was like, I think my brain is vibrating right now. Who knew the iPhone iOS had this new this new colorway? What an incredible UX. I feel like I'm looking down at my phone from a drone. Yeah. Now at that point, a person who was smart, a person who was worried about, having incriminating evidence about there would probably go home. What did I do? I went to my friend's house. I had a zillion more beers, and you know what we talked about? Deep geopolitics, like serious shit. Like there was a point in the night where I was actually wearing these glasses. Okay, these are fast glasses if you can't tell. All right, just went to 7-Eleven, pulled them out. I was missing one of the lenses. I'm off to Kingdom Come. And someone was like, we should talk about Israel and Gaza. And I was like, you know what? I think as a society, we should talk about it more. I think it's important, given the horrific nature of things going on there, that it fades into the background. Okay? I think it's very important that we discuss this as a general group of people who need to make sure that we're not complicit, which, as Americans, sadly, we are. Complicit in a lot of tragedy and a lot of horror and a lot of things happening. They're killing journalists. A lot of stuff's happening. Yeah. Do I think all that's true? Yes. Do I think that fresh off a Creed concert, wearing a leather choker, missing one eye from my 7-Eleven sunglasses, wearing eyeliner smudged on my eyes from my mother, is now wearing a shirt that says I heart butt rock and Jesus. By the way, a figure neither side in that is interested in. And frankly, neither am I. And I know that's to some upsetting. It's just a shirt. Is this the right time for me to wade in? That was a question that and my thought was that maybe no. So what I did was yes. I weighed in. What did I say? I don't know. I think I probably had the best take on it that I've ever had, that anyone's ever had. And it's unfortunate that it wasn't being recorded because it might have been one of those takes that might have ended the conflict as a whole. And I don't mean to make light of it. It's horrific. But it's better than not even addressing it. It's kind of like my Jack Black, this is not the greatest song in the world, this is just a tribute. I'm pretty sure I had the game-ending take that would have been great for everybody. And I want to be clear about that. Everybody. not erasing the plight of the Palestinians. I was actually making it front and center. If you can imagine that in that state, if you can imagine that in that state, the state that I was in, was almost as hard of a state to imagine as the one we are trying to create, that everyone will be happy with. But some people lack imagination. Some people lack willpower. Some people lack the get-it-done attitude that I have. And I did have one. So where are we, folks? Where do we go as a society? Does the quote-unquote collapse of the comedy community give us any kind of inkling of where things are going for us all? I would tell you yes. I do think, okay, and we discussed this in the Sydney Sweeney episode. We discuss it on every episode. We love to discuss this topic. It might be my only take. This show might only be about this. But the idea here is that as we move forward in this world of more and more content, AI, yes. Easy to upload, yes. Easy to buy equipment, yes. Holy shit. I might have to pause my soliloquy here because I don't know if there's a great sunset going on. Let me just go show the people who are actually watching this incredible sunset. One moment. I mean, this is special stuff, folks. Look at that. Would you look at that? That's a nice sunset, ladies and gentlemen. That's delectable. It's cotton candy. It's beautiful. You know, get outside. It's kind of part of the purpose of doing this pod in an Amazon fucking rainforest. You got to get outside. Got to get outside. Got to get outside. Shout out to the Bay. We love the Bay. He actually doesn't. Now I've really fucked up the angle here. Got to fix the angle. Probably should edit this out, but will I? The people like it raw. Not a sex joke. All right. Boy, is that tough. You know, this is not just to say touch grass, but it is to say that, you know, we are physical entities. We are of the world. We are of the planet. All right? As we move further and further down the dystopian tech-based hellhole that we've all created, that honestly I feel underinvested in. This is one of the things. I think I want to do an entire episode of Palantir because it seems to me that what they're doing is some of the like kind of dystopian surveillance state, all encompassing, mixed in with AI that you could have never imagined how powerful it would be, mixed in with governments that have a more authoritarian bent, all kind of coming together into this place where it feels almost impossible to exist as a solo entity unless you just disconnect from the entire thought process and stick a Molly pill up your ass and fucking vibe, which I do fully support. But knowing all that, I wonder if I should park some of my assets there. You understand what I'm saying? I'm saying assets like I have more. What I mean is like, you know, and I think this is a problem with our society is that I'm thinking, well, if I don't put some money in it, then it's all downside. It's kind of an emotional hedge, but now, of course, you're financially supporting something you don't agree with, but also it's like, well, that's going to happen, right? It's going to happen either way. Why can't daddy get a nut off with it? Is a fair question. I really do have more fun talking about the end of society than I do talking about my own industry, don't I? But that's neither here nor there, because the sunset distracted me. And I wish I remember the point that I was making before, but it's such a beautiful sunset. I suppose what I was going to say, and knowing me, it is what I was going to say, is that as I can note that there are negative impulses as we live in this more and more algorithmatized, yes, that's a word, I made it up, society. That doesn't mean you have to give in to them. Yes, you have to know how the game works. You have to play the game, but you can be yourself within that game. Because if you win doing something that you hate, it's awesome to win. I would love to win. But then you will always hate yourself. And I do think that even though a lot of the trends and the directions and the things, the ways that we're going, and like I said, yes, in the Sydney Sweeney episode we talked about this, the ways to cut through can be being more bombastic, being more simplistic, not trying to understand everything, but just being a pure agent of negativity and disgrace. You don't have to do that. You don't have to. Because some of what cuts through is truth-telling. Now, not everyone may agree with Mr. Maron and some of the takes that he's had on his recent press tour. I've read the comment threads. A lot of people don't. Now, a lot of those people are Rogan people saying that Maron's just bitter. And I don't think that's true. I think that some of his critiques may not land with me, but I don't think they're all just based on being bitter. And even if they are, that's part of who he is, and that's part of his voice, and that's what makes him him. He makes good points. He does. Doesn't mean they're all right. They're not. But you can cut through not just by being a piece of clickbait fucking slop. You can also cut through by being the voice that actually calls out what everyone has been seeing that no one else has quite said. By being the voice in the room that's like, yeah, fuck it. Don't you feel shitty about this? And then other people saying, yeah, you know what? Just hearing you say that made me feel better. That is one way to cut through. Don't take my word for it. I haven't done it. But I've consumed enough art in my time, and I have enough hope within me to tell you that I do believe that. So this episode is not about the end of times or a horrible new world for comedy. It's about an accurate assessment of a change in the landscape, what that will change in terms of how things are for stand-up, other industries as well, and how to operate effectively within it. Is this a roadmap? No. I think what you should do, and what I recommend, truly, if you just want to be successful, is I just killed a mosquito on my knuckle. Sorry, folks. But that was electric, and that definitely tells me that I can't do much more of this episode. If you want to be successful, okay, and we can do this a couple different ways, okay? Because, again, a lot of this episode has been me being like, you know, this is what has happened, this is where I see things going, and, you know, but at the same time, like, I really, like, believe in us as people, and, like, also, like, I understand that, like, dude, like, the truth always wins in the end, you know, and I think that's nice. But if you want my actual advice on how to be successful quickly, come up with one idea, tell it to ChatGPT, get ChatGPT to read it, and also make a shitty thumbnail and just start posting gruel on YouTube until it hits. And it will. So there it is, folks. Hopefully a nice takeaway. There's my analysis of the comedy industry as it is. I don't know what is next. We will see. But I do think that even as things change, and they will always be scary and they will always feel new, I do think the desire for good shit will never go away. So yes, my short-term advice, if you want to get successful, just use AI, capitalize, you'll be good. But long-term, if you want to be happy and successful, nothing ever goes for the shit that's actually good. Now, on a more uplifting note, I think we should do one final segment.
All aboard the flight log. We're gonna break this one down, island style. Epstein Minute, there's a minute missing. Epstein Minute, We gonna talk about it. Epstein Minute. We won't stop talking about it. Epstein Minute. Yeah, yeah. Epstein Minute. We're gonna talk about it. Epstein Minute. We ain't stopped talking about it. Yeah. Come on now. Don't stop talking about it, y'all. He's on the list. It's the Epstein Minute, baby.
Now I want to hit this segment here because I think it's important to not stop hitting this segment. I'm not going to lie. I haven't seen much of it in the news this entire week. Why? Why do we think that is? Why are there no new developments in it? Is part of it because he finally figured out a true strategy to distract everybody by calling the National Guard into Washington, D.C.? Does that feel potentially like what might be happening? Now, I know he has a desire to clean things up, blah, 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 but the idea of knowing that every time he calls the National Guard into a city, everyone's only going to talk about that, well, that would be what I would do if I was also implicated in the Epstein case and wanted people to shut the fuck up about it. That's basically the Epstein Minute for this week is where are the news stories? Keep the news stories coming. Nothing has been answered since the last time we talked. Don't let tanks rolling past the Commanders Stadium with flags that say, call them the Redskins, distract you. You got to stay on top of it, folks. Also, since when are we using the National Guard for things? I thought they were just supposed to vibe. I thought the concept of the National Guard was just to float on a boat and chill for a little bit and get, free ROTC at your local JC. Is that a lot of acronyms? Yes. Are they correct? Yes, they make sense. I promise. We got to stay on top of it, folks. We got to stay on top of it until we actually get something. So that was the Epstein Minute for the week. But sometimes it's only a minute because we're not going to stop doing it until we have what we need. All right, folks, it's a quick one. That's the Joey Show for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Come on out, see me on tour, joeyavery.com/live. I'm Joey Avery. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Thank God I have a podcast.